Hey there, everyone. Welcome to my Trails of Cold Steel 2 retrospective review, whatever you want to call it. This is going to have to be a kind of interesting one because this is obviously the sequel to Trails of Cold Steel. So I'm going to split this review into three parts. The first part is going to be the completely spoiler-free overview of what you can expect from the game and really the series. Because if anyone's watching this and they've not really heard of this game, I want to approach it without getting into specifics because as soon as I get into specifics on the sequel, I'm necessarily spoiling the first game. And that would be bad. So, Trails of Cold Steel 2 and Trails of Cold Steel 1 is a very, very in-depth JRPG. It is part of the, frankly, massive Trails series. They did just recently announce a localization of Trails of Cold Steel 3. It's going to be coming out on the PlayStation 3, as well as probably Steam, but I don't think that's been confirmed yet. So the series is ongoing. The first series that came out in the US was the Trails in the Sky series, which you can get on Steam already. Was originally on, I want to say, the PlayStation Vita, but I played it on Steam, so that's what I recommend. I've done a couple reviews of these games, but if you haven't seen them, the short version is that these games have some of the best world building I've ever seen, which is not surprising. They've got, at this point, I think 9 games set in the same time frame, same universe. They keep jumping around to different continents and talking about what's happening there, and the games are interrelated but not dependent on each other. So what I mean by that is if you played Trails of Cold Steel 1 and you hadn't played the Trails of the Sky series, yeah, there's going to be a couple of references. There's going to be a couple of characters that show up that you won't recognize from before, but the stories are largely independent. And by largely, I mean like 98% independent. You certainly get more out of it if you understand what was happening up in the Liberal Kingdom from Trails in the Sky, but it's by no means a requirement. To put it in context, it's sort of like, do you have to play Persona 3 to play Persona 4? No, but there are certain things in there that definitely mean more to you if you have. So, kind of what can you expect if you play these series? They are the great and the terrible thing about them is that the first game of every series is set up for the rest of the series. So Trails of the Sky 1 and Trails of Cold Steel 1 is really just setting up the world. You go around, you go on. The series tells this tale of Class 7, which is a class of military academy students. And the first game really is just, you're going around the country, you're seeing the different areas, you're understanding what political pressures and malcontent there are in those areas, and you're learning more about the kingdom that you're in. Game 2, Trails of Cold Steel 2, is where it takes all of those, tensions that the first game set up and really has them explode and has the, real brunt of the story start, or at the very least, the brunt that the first game set up. Obviously, there is a Trails of Cold Steel 3 and even a 4 that is going to expand upon this story, so I don't want to say it's the main push of the story, but Cold Steel 1 definitely just feels like the setup for the story. So if you play Cold Steel 1, be aware of that. After watching this, you're like, man, this game doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, the first one kind of doesn't. The advantage of it, I would say, is that the Cold Steel series, like I said, the world is one of the most believable worlds I've ever seen. It is beautiful. You'll go into different towns, there are so many characters, so many NPCs with sparkling and unique personalities. To use an example, you know how in Final Fantasy VII, the Turks were really unique and interesting and memorable. The other members of Avalanche were unique and interesting and memorable, and you kind of remember them. Possibly Jesse more than the others, but still, they have these little quirks, these little longings and desires, and these... Freaking every NPC in this series is like that. You end up with a supporting cast of 30 to 50 people, depending on how far you extend it. Yeah, okay, there's a few of them, this is the baker in this town. He sells you bread and doesn't have any unique characterization, but it's astounding how much this series does in order to try and make it much more, interesting and make the world seem vibrant and alive. And, you'll talk to people, not everyone agrees with what the main party is doing, but for the most part, they support, the disagreements are complex and that they don't just boil down to good versus evil for the most part. There definitely are some characters that come off very much worse than others, but there's always the undertone of a more interesting thing. So, minor spoilers. Now I'm going to have to talk about Trails of Cold Steel 2, and I'm going to talk about some specifics that happen. I will not be talking about the major spoilers that happen. So if you haven't played it, it's up to you if you want to watch this, because I will talk about the things I disliked about it in kind of vague terms. First and foremost, so Trails of Cold Steel 1 ends, and this is where, like, if you haven't played Cold Steel 1, this is where we kind of get into a pseudo-major spoiler, because I can't talk about Cold Steel 2 without talking about this. Cold Steel 1 ends up with the party getting separated, and the main character, like, escaping. And Cold Steel 2 kind of starts with you having to discreetly go around the country and recollect your party mates. The thing that I had frustrating about that is, first of all, they make a very big point of the fact that you are sort of... at the end of the first game, a civil war broke out, and the noble faction that took over the capital kind of sees you as public enemy number one. You have managed to get your hold of an incredible, powerful tool, and they really want to either get you to join them or die. Like, they're very actively seeking you out. So they make a big point about how you're going to have to lay low. And yet the very first thing the game has you do is go into a section and be like, oh, well, we need to find our friends. Let's ask if there's any jobs we can do. And I'm like, aren't we supposed to be laying low? Why are we going out and going to, like, market stalls and being like, hi, I want to buy some bread for the church? Like, that's not how you lay low at all. The second problem with that overall structure is that you end up with, and this matters differently for different people, but a lot of times you'll end up running into your old companions. They've, like, gone home and are just sort of sitting around until you show up and are like, hey, asshole, there's a civil war and we should go stop it. And they're like, okay. Some of them make a lot more sense than others. There is character Fee that is actively doing a reconnaissance and is trying to figure out how to bypass Imperial lines in order to meet up with more of the resistance movement at the Zinder, or not the Zinder Gate, over at, like, a military camp. So, like, that group is actively working. But then there's other people that are just like, oh yeah, I came home to my father's stead and I've been running the province because I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, you are a military academy, you are a military person. Like, it'd be one thing if they were like, oh, I don't really care. Okay, sure, I'll help you. But they take it off like, oh, they needed the main character to come before the plot could start. So they just sort of faffed about until you showed up. And it's really frustrating. It kind of disincentivizes or disenfranchises the other members of the party. And for a game that's this good about characterization and world building, it makes them seem weaker for no real reason. Like I said, there are exceptions. Fee was portrayed very, very, very well. Speaking, the other big issue is that, so, Tales of Cold Steel 1 and 2 were originally written to be one game. And as they were producing it, they came to realize that they had too much content. They had about a game and a half. And it really feels like what they did was they added in padding in order to turn 1.5 into 2 games. Because there are definitely sections which don't really seem necessary to push forward the main plot. There's a point where you have to go through 4 separate shrines, and it's just a tedious dungeon crawl. It's still interesting, it's still well done. They split up very much, but you can definitely feel where the game drags a little bit. And it's because of, they originally didn't want those sections in there, but then they realized, I personally, and this is something I'm very big on, games are much, much better. I would much rather have a relatively short game that is just pure goodness than a bloated game because you took your short game and added a bunch of extra crap to do. That doesn't really seem to affect... Dragon Age Inquisition is a great example of this. Dragon Age Inquisition is freaking awesome on all the story missions. But then they have just all these other areas where you just wander around for a while because they want to add, 60 hours of playtime instead of just having a game with, like, 30 hours of playtime that is just excellent. And sure, people would probably complain if it was only 30 hours, but... Here's the other thing. If you gotta add the bloat, make the bloat optional. I really felt like, and granted, I do think Inquisition, a lot of the bloat was optional, but there was no way of telling if you needed to do it to get prepared for the later stages or not. So, that was frustrating. Second problem I had was that I talk about how the world building and the characterization of the NPCs is amazing. Weirdly enough, the characterization of the main party is very often not amazing. There are exceptions. Sarah and Fee got really, really good treatment in this game. I got to learn a lot more about them. I got to understand what makes them tick. I got to really appreciate them as characters. But a number of the other characters, you could learn like one minor fact about them, and that kind of extends the whole game. Elisa, you find out, really Elisa doesn't change at all in Cold Steel 2, although again, you can somewhat forgive that, because again, Cold Steel 2 was meant to be the second half of Cold Steel 1. Like, they weren't meant to be separate games when they were plotted, and she does get a lot of development in Cold Steel 1. If these were the same game, I wouldn't really have a problem with that. But then you've got other characters, like Laura has an interesting, like, setup in that her dad is the greatest swordsman in the land. He is the Divine Blade Master, and she is his successor, only she's not nearly as good as he is, obviously. And there's just that pressure of trying to, like, live in your dad's footsteps, and they could have done some interesting things with that. It's a big cliche, but it would be an interesting story, but then they don't. They just sort of, like, acknowledge that that's a thing that's happening, and they're frustrated by it. Okay. Like, and then, like, Gaius and Elliot are probably the worst ones. Like, Gaius, I don't even know what his character is. It's like, oh, he's this guy out from the, like, nomadic tribes, and he also likes Ereboni, and he considers it his second home, and he wants to protect it. And that's, like, his entire character. And then Elliot, you know, wanted to be a musician, but was kind of pressured into not being a musician because his dad was this great military guy. And that's kind of, like, everything time you spend with him, he's talking about music. So it's weird where it feels like if they were minor NPCs, it would be fine. You wouldn't need a whole slew of different characterizations and a slew of impact and things that were happening with the characters in order to make it interesting and good. That shouldn't be required for a minor NPC. But for a major party character, are you serious? Yeah, that one's kinda necessary. So, that's the kind of frustrating. And the other one that's weird, actually, while I'm on the characterization, you've also got a couple of cases of really inconsistent characterization. Because, like, Fee and Elisa and Sarah, their characterization comes out of the main party missions. Like, you'll run into something in the main plot, and then the character will open up more about their past, and you'll learn more about them. There are what the game does, which is awesome, is it has routine moments where you end up with a couple of free hours, and you can choose how to spend them, and you can hang out with some of your party. And you gotta pick. And obviously, if you hang out with someone, you tend to find out a little bit more about them. But the main push of the characterization is always in the main story. Except for Milliam. Milliam has some really interesting segments in her extra time that are not ever touched in the main plot. And it's the only one, as far as I know, that's like that, where it's like the character is super obnoxious and super annoying and you can't stand her unless you spend extra time with her and start to understand kind of why she's like that. And it makes her... I still don't like Milliam as a character. I don't like having her in my party because her scenes are just obnoxious and overdone and, you know, oh my gosh, everything is super happy. But I respect her as a character because there's some interesting things happening with her. And some interesting things I want to explore more with. So, other thing, and I realize I'm making a lot of really minor nitpicks. Again, go back to the video. I do really, really, really like Milliam. Or not Milliam, the game. I really, really like the game. The game is relatively amazing. The problem with the game, I keep having minor issues with it, minor quibbles, because I've always been a very big believer in the fact that anything that you really like deserves a very, very introspective and deep look, and we need to find out how it can get better. So I'm always going to tear the things I love to shreds, because I think it's important, I think it's relevant, I think it should be done. So, the other issue, and this is a super, super minor one, and it's interesting in that this is something I hate, but yet I ended up not caring about, if that makes sense. What I hated was, for some reason, the Trails series has this ongoing thing between sister and adopted brother relationships. And it bothers the bakukas out of me. I despise it, I hate it, I can't stand it, I want it gone. The good thing is that in this game, or in this series, they very much downplay it. Like, it's definitely there, but it's more of... They actually treat it as your sister, your adopted sister, has feelings for you, and she knows she shouldn't, because you're her adopted brother. Like, come on, that's weird. And so she's constantly repressing those and not acting on them because they're freaking weird, and her best friend just teases her over it the entire game. But your character never acts on it. That's never a real plot line. So, I've got to say, overall, we've got an absolute fantabulicious situation where that's by far the one I want to be treated with the best. Obviously, I'm going to say I don't really feel like we should necessarily have that at all. Like, I don't think that particular trope is good. It bothers me. It weirds me out. And granted, that may be a little bit of a personal thing for me, because I've got two older sisters, and one of them was a model, and my friends were constantly giving me, "Oh man, your sister's so hot." I'm just like, I don't want to think about that. Shut up. Have you ever seen? No, and I don't want to. So I'm a little bit extra, I guess, sensitive to that. But regardless, we do absolutely have it's just a weird thing that the director seems to really like, and I wish would go away. But again, at least in this series, it's a super, super minor one, and it's treated as, yeah, this is weird, we shouldn't be doing this, as opposed to, we can find a way to make it work. Please don't make it work. So now we move on to the absolutely spoilerific section. If you have not played Trails of Cold Steel 2, do not listen past this point, alright? Because I'm about to reveal some in-game stuff that you definitely should not know. So first of all, the less major spoiler, just in case any of you didn't click off yet, the very end of the game, after you fight the last boss, there is a weird, like, 12-hour epilogue that goes on that just really overstays its welcome and kind of leaves you with a sour taste about the game. So, in the first game, you end up with, like I said, you're a military student at a military academy, and you keep going back where you'll go out on a field study class, and you'll explore the kingdom, and you'll find out about an area, and then you'll come back, and there'll be this, like, free day section where you're back at the school, and you can go around, you can talk to the other students, and there's some quests to do, and that's largely where a lot of your, like, hangout time with your friends or romantic partners or whoever comes from. Like, that's the structure. Go out, come back, free day. Go out, come back, free day. Go out, come back, free day, etc. So, the second game, because there's a war going on, the enemy faction has actually occupied your school. And so you go the whole game kind of getting your free time each time you kick the noble faction out of an area of the game. But you never really get to spend time at the school, and so they decided at the end of the game to have a school section to cap off the experience. I will be the first to say I think this could have worked fine if it was still in a singular game. But the fact that they split the games up and all of a sudden you have this weird last day at school section at the end of the game when the rest of the game has never had you at school just feels slightly out of place. And the second part to that is that, even worse to a degree, there's this whole big thing on the last day of how everyone except you is graduating early and going off to do other things instead of staying around for their second year. But with the exception of Eustace, they never establish why the hell that's happening. They just say, everyone's just like, oh yeah, we're leaving. I have no idea why everyone except me is graduating a year early. Like, it makes no freaking sense whatsoever. But apparently they're doing it. I guess they need it for the sequel and whatever. Like, I don't mean to be a, whiny bitch about it, but kind of am. The other thing, and then after you do that, like, actually slightly before that, they also have a bizarre section where this would have been cooler in Japan. So I told you this is a 9-game series. Currently, only 5 of the games have been localized, and as I said, Trails of Cold Steel 3 has already been confirmed that they are localizing it. They're probably doing Cold Steel 4 as well. But there are 2 games called the Crossbell Arc that have never been localized and were made after Trails of the Sky but before this series. So they may never be localized, it's possible. So, there's a section right after you beat the final boss where you have a, like, 5-hour excursion, okay, maybe 3.5, into the Crossbell City, and you get to play as 2 of the main characters from the Crossbell games, and it's just super weird, and it's like, you get to see all these characters, and it's very obviously a fan service moment where it's like, oh, hey, check this out, you know, here's this guy, he's saying stuff that sounds like this guy, but for me, and for, I assume, the vast majority of the American audience, we're like, who the fuck are these people? What? Like, it means literally nothing. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they do. We don't know what their purpose is. We don't know why we should care about them. In fact, if I didn't know as much about the backstory of the game as I did, I wouldn't even know that Crossbell had an arc. Because, you know, the existence of other games is never mentioned anywhere. So you end up with these characters that you're not familiar with and don't know anything about. And they just have this entire, you know, several-hour segment where they go through a dungeon and ultimately end up fighting the main character of this game. So you have to help them beat you. It's interesting, but it's kind of a swing and a miss. I will be the first to say I don't know what they could have done about it, because obviously there would have also been a lot of outcry if that section was omitted from the American release. But it really feels like it should be like post-game content as opposed to a required part of the plot so you can spend this time with characters you don't know about. And then, like I said, you go have the school section, which takes another several hours, and then there's a dungeon section, which I will say the dungeon section was a lot of fun, but again, I do feel like it should be post-game content, not a required part of the plot, because it adds nothing. You go through this several level dungeon, you fight a whole lot of very powerful enemies, and you get to the top, and there's this guy that's like, brr, 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 brr. And then, you know, he's like, I'm a trial, but you don't have to beat me. And we're like, we're going to beat you anyway. And then we beat him, and he's like, good job. And it's just, nothing is resolved by it. I don't, like, the dungeon was cool. The dungeon actually lets you, pay out the nose, but you can actually use some of the enemies in your party. There's, like, these mirror items that will change you into some of the enemies you fought. You can actually use those same mirror items and play as the Crossbell guys from the other section. Like, it's cool. I really enjoy it, but it doesn't need to be core, you know? You shouldn't be expected to do that in order to actually finish the playthrough, because it adds nothing. And it's like, for the very last thing the game does to be a completely unnecessary and, frankly, time-wasting moment of the game, it just kind of leaves you with a bad impression of the very last impression of the game I should have should not be, oh God, thank God that's finally over. I didn't think that would ever end. Like, that's you don't want that to be your player's last impression of your video game. And then the final thing. At the very end of the game, you find out that one, Osborne, who was killed at the end of Cold Steel 1, wasn't actually killed. 2, Osborne is the guy that dropped Reen off at the, you know, Schwarzer family estate all those years ago. And 3, Osborne is actually Reen's true father. This frustrates me. I'll be the first to say. But what frustrates me about it, truly, is not that... I actually agree with a lot of it. I think the fact that Osborne survived the first game, I have no problem with. There were definitely clues that he wasn't actually dead. There was one very specific thing where you're hanging out with Claire, who's the railway military police, and she says that the nobles are refusing to release Osborne's body. And since that moment, I considered the possibility he might actually be dead. The fact that Osborne actually, you know, was the guy that dropped Reen off with the Schwarzer household, I'm also actually okay with. They do give you a very, very brief flashback to that guy, and you can kind of tell it's the same person, although I never put it together, but it's fair. I am still not a fan of Osborne being Reen's actual father. And the big reason I say that is because Reen, Osborne, like, is completely... Osborne is very calculating and, you know, plays a master game of chess and thinks someone was ahead and sees everyone else that he interacts as, you know, either pawns or enemies. And he treats Reen the same way through the whole game. And it just feels it feels very difficult for me to swallow. I have a hard time accepting the premise that this guy can be so calculated and cold-hearted that he doesn't even see his own son in any different light. I wouldn't have a problem with him still being calculating and still being like, well, this is what I need you to do. But the fact that he could go through and not even ever acknowledge their relationship until Reen, it's a moment too far, in my opinion. Like, so what I'm really trying to talk about here, and I realize I'm rambling, the Osborn is seen as kind of a Deus Ex, and thinks several moves away and can perfectly plan everything, and like it's implied he knew he was going to get shot, and he allowed the plan to go off because that would cause the Civil War to happen, and the Civil War would get concluded with an overwhelming victory for his side. And it's just like, no. I'm sorry, no one can be that confident in the things that are going to happen. I get that he's based on Bismarck, and Bismarck was really good at accurately predicting, but even Bismarck didn't do shit like that. Like, Bismarck did not allow Germany to go into civil war and, thousands of people to get killed because he was pretty sure that it would ultimately work out for the better as long as 17 different people all did precisely what he thought they would do. Like, that's it becomes almost farcical the way they present it. So, at the end, like, I'm okay with Osborn surviving. I'm okay with Osborn having a connection to Reen and having, like, suspected Reen would be able to command the Divine Knights, as we saw him do. I'm not really okay with just the fact of Osborn being Reen's father doesn't seem to add anything to the game. It doesn't seem, because Osborn doesn't treat Reen any differently. He treats Reen the exact same as, he treats everybody else. So why are you adding that in other than for an extra little bit of, oh, and then this happened, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, it seems a twist for the sake of being a twist. The other two make a lot of sense and were foreshadowed. This one really wasn't, in my opinion. It seems to come a little bit out of nowhere, and again, it's just it strikes me as the what is that guy's name? The guy that did the what's a twist guy, where he at the end he's always going to add something, and this is what was really going on. Aren't I clever? And it does. I'm just like, oh god, dude, shut up. But anyway, that is my retrospective. That is my thoughts. Thank you very much for watching through this. I realize it's been a lot of me rambling, but at the end, as kind of a culmination, if I was God of the World and I was making Cold Steel 2 and I want to be better, number one, and I realize this was probably a financial decision, make Cold Steel 1 longer and cut out the bloat. Like, these would have worked better as a single story, no question. I started this video by complaining that a lot of the first games are just set up, and it's because both times they expect the first game to go longer, and then they realize they can't make them go longer. So, let the first, make the first game longer, cut out the bloat. I don't think anyone would care if you had, a 80-hour game 1 instead of 2 70-hour games. Like, because that's about how long I feel like it would take, and maybe a little bit longer, maybe it would have been 100 hours, but whatever. Persona 5 was 100 hours and nobody really complained. Number 2. Spend a little bit more, make your main characters a little bit more multifaceted. There's really no reason to require or to have this great characterization, but only for certain characters. It feels like the director really likes certain characters and spends more time with them, and everyone else just kind of got a moe. And it's like, oh, well, this is their story, and every time we talk to them, this is what they're doing. And I'm like, that's not interesting. I'm spending time with these to learn more about them. Why is there not more about them to learn? And then number 3, like I said, Osborn can totally have run into Reen as an orphan. You could even be setting up, and this would be awesome, that Osborn actually had Reen's parents killed off in order to have a better control of how Reen was raised, so Reen would be more useful. Like, that would be actually really cool. You find out that Osborn found Reen when Reen was a baby, and, got Reen over to the Schwarzers, because, he was like, I can't take care of these guys, but this family, has a daughter, and they want to have a son, but they haven't been able to. Sure, you know what? There's this kid, he may be really, really helpful. He's got some unique stuff going on. Try and make sure he, gets martial training, because I think there's a good chance he'll need it. So, I think that would have been, and maybe you don't do that. Maybe you don't make Osborn a outright villain like that. But I don't see how Osborn being Reen's actual father helps the story in any meaningful way. So change that. Or possibly, like I said, this is game 2 of a 4-game series, so it may be that he has to be Reen's father for some reason. In which case, I don't know that yet. But right now, it just seems silly. And lastly, just I would say I feel like the padding got in the way of the plot. Because, like I said, there are definite moments in the game where we have segments where, like, the plot says that we need to lay low, but the game says we're going to go out and talk to literally everyone in the city and see if anyone needs help. And it's just, I'm like, that's not laying low, guys. You suck at this. But we're at the 30-minute mark. I think I've actually been talking longer than I had footage to show, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you for being here, everyone.